Welcome to Grow and Glow with yours truly, Miss Alex Nicholas, Miss Independent, La Mera Mera Petatera. Bet you're wondering what we are doing in my garage. We will go ahead and get to it. This will be part one of my own personal journey with therapy. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome back, baddies. Again, we're in my closet. It's actually a garage closet because it has like a single person door. It doesn't have like a garage door. So I would say it's a garage closet or a closet. The reason for why we're in here is because this is going to be part one of me opening up about my own journey with therapy. As I've mentioned before, I've been in talk therapy for about 4 years now, in and out about once a week since May of 2020. And I'm going to talk about why I decided to go to therapy and how it's going. That's why it's probably going to be a 3-part series. So let's go ahead and get started. So the reason for why it was important for me to give you guys a visualization of what the first 2 years of therapy meant for me is because one of the very first questions that my therapist asked me is, how about we start to unpack? And the word unpack was not as meaningful as it is to me now. What it means for me to unpack now is to really take out anything and everything that I need to take out and look at it to really determine if I really want to continue holding on to whatever it is that I'm holding on to. That's why a dirty garage full of things is so metaphoric to unpacking, because that's what it felt like to me. Back then, when I first started therapy during my first session, I didn't realize how much stuff I was holding on to until I started to unpack. And you're asked to start to look through it to determine what you want to keep and what you want to get rid of. The reason for why therapy or talking about therapy is so important is because I do want to destigmatize the idea within our culture in particular that therapy is only for people who have some severe mental illnesses. That is simply not true. I realized that I needed to sit down with a mental health professional, not only for myself, but because I was starting to display toxic behavior toward others that was, for lack of a better term, hurtful. And it was very evident to my peers who had also experienced similar abuse that I had, that it was necessary for me to sit down with someone to talk about what I had gone through. I also felt that when I was trying to live my own life, I was always held back by my emotional irregularity. Throughout this series of me talking about my therapeutic experience, my counseling, talk therapy, I definitely want to hear from people to know what it is that you are seeking or what you want to know to clarify any concerns that you might have toward therapy. That's also a big part of this, is that I want to hear from people so that I can know what it is that you guys would like me to talk about when it comes to therapy. I'm going to go a little bit in depth about my personal upbringing and the abuse that I went through. It's going to be very surface level and very generalized. As a child, my primary parent did have a partner. This partner was unfortunately an alcoholic, and because they were an alcoholic. They displayed abusive tendencies. Their abuse ranged from physical abuse toward my parent, emotional, mental abuse, and financial abuse. Eventually, there was sexual assault involved. And because of this, I would say that the most difficult part of my life, where I endured the most amount of abuse, was in fact during my childhood. And because as we were very much in survival mode, there really was no space for us to really even know what to do other than to just survive. And so I do want to say something very openly. I don't hold anything against my parents, because I know that we were all in a place where we all had to survive. People who are in survival or know what it's like to be in survival can guarantee that most of the time, if not every single time, you have no choice but to do what you need to do to survive. And there is no space for much else. So I want to really make that clear to anyone who feels like judging. It's the kind of upbringing that I had. It wasn't easy. It was very tough. And so, yes, in fact, my inner child was extremely wounded for a really long time. And when I became an adult, especially during my early 20s and mid 20s, I was doing what everybody else does. I was numbing myself with alcohol. I still really like alcohol, by the way, but I don't have a codependency relationship with alcohol like I did. I had very toxic romantic relationships. It was hard for me to have a healthy relationship romantically, just because that was the result of my trauma. More importantly were my own tendencies and habits, and the way that I've always been a little bit explosive. My temper has always been something that has been at the forefront. Sometimes when I feel under attack or hurt, my ego steps in, and my ego can be a bit harsh, to say the least. I started to realize how much all of my toxicity, especially toward the end of my 20s, was really affecting me. And I remember in particular, I sat down with one of my colleagues, and she said it very openly. She said, I've been a victim of sexual assault, and I went to therapy, and it helped. And that was when I started to realize that I probably needed to sit down with a mental health professional. In May of 2020, I booked an appointment. I got very lucky because I found someone who is compatible with my journey. And I know that isn't uncommon. I know that finding a therapist that someone feels safe with and comfortable and maintains a level of professionalism is not easy. But yes, I found my therapist. And again, the first question that she asked me after we did the initial intake review was, well, one, she asked, why are you here? Why do you feel like you need therapy? And I was very open. I said I have very poor romantic relationships. At that time, actually, the year that I sought therapy, within a few months, I got involved in an extremely toxic, scandalous relationship with someone. And that relationship was one of the first relationships where within my romantic partner, I experienced a level of sexual assault and an attempt of physical abuse. And that was something that I wasn't really familiar with until this particular person came in my life. Thankfully, it was short-lived, and I learned really quickly that their behavior was simply not okay. First session in therapy, my therapist asked what I wanted to work on, and I said my relationship with others. Romantic relationships weren't very great, like I said, and my relationship with my mom was very rocky. It was explosive, and it wasn't very great either. After we talked about the reason for why I was there, Usually in therapy, you're asked to do some kind of homework. And my homework was, again, to start to unpack who I was and the reason I became who I was, and decide what I wanted to keep, what I wanted to work on, and what I wanted to throw out. It was definitely easier said than done. I thought, okay, great. I get to just sit here and really think about who I am. And then I decide that I don't want to be certain parts of me anymore. And it makes me laugh because it was very naive of me to think that it was just going to be that easy. It really wasn't. It took me at least 2 years to really unpack who I was. And during those 2 years, no one really tells you how turmoiled you become, how even more emotionally unregulated you become, and how I still practice all of my toxic tendencies. I still had toxic romantic relationships. I was still using alcohol and other things to numb myself. I still dissociated. I still displayed erratic behavior. And I've forgiven myself, and I hold a lot of grace for myself during this time, because during the first 2 years, all I did was open up in my mind or in my soul or within me. I opened up a dark closet full of my childhood trauma, and I had to go through every single memory like if it was a box. And through every single memory, there was something difficult that I had to process. And within that word of processing, there was a lot of reckoning. There was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of sadness. There was a lot of moments where I asked myself and the higher power, why would certain things happen to a child? And it wasn't easy to accept certain behaviors from adults, abusive behavior from adults. It wasn't about me. Every single time that I was able to sit down and accept my childhood and hold myself through that memory, I understood that a lot of what happened to me when I was a child was not my fault. It wasn't. I had no responsibility in the behavior of others and the behavior of adults in particular. And that really was a moment in time where I started to find clarity. I found acceptance, and I found forgiveness. I did this exercise over and over and over again for 2 to 3 years, and I'm still doing it. I'm still sitting down with myself, unpacking. That's why being in this closet is so metaphoric to the first part of therapy. I do believe that we would all benefit from sitting down with a mental health professional. I know it can be scary. I know the negative comments that people around you may have, but it's worth it, because I don't know anyone on this planet who doesn't have a closet full of shit that they need to work through. If you are someone who is thinking about going to therapy, I would say go for it. Just know that it's going to feel a lot like this, where you're going to walk into a closet full of things and you just take your time and look through every box. You're allowed to take breaks. After you've worked through something that was difficult for you, something traumatic, either in your childhood as an adult, you can then sit down and take care of yourself. It's definitely a range. You could do whatever it is that fills your soul. For us women, it's about getting our nails done or taking a bath. You don't want to overindulge without doing the work unless you're happy overindulging. after you really process and reckon with and accept or come to terms with, again, a difficult part of your life, make sure that you're there for yourself as well by doing something that really fills you emotionally and mentally. I learned that not only from my therapist, but from my friends as well. I have a really great friend group that has almost pretty much carried me through a lot of difficult times. My sisters, they really have done the hard work of lifting me up when I couldn't lift myself up. And I really, really appreciate them for being there when I couldn't be there for myself. So I'm going to go ahead and break down the therapy session itself. I think it was because my emotional cup was overflowing. So I was pouring out a lot of my emotions onto my therapist, and I held nothing back. I know it may not be as easy for everyone else, but I do highly recommend that you allow yourself to be as honest as possible with your mental health professional, because it will allow them to really dig into whatever it is that you're holding on to. For the first 2 years, it was a very emotional conversation where I would be crying, sobbing, boogers out. It was very, very tough on my body to go 45 minutes straight of crying and sobbing and recalling my trauma. It feels like you're reliving it. You're reliving every emotion. You're reliving every experience. So my body would just get exhausted. And that's pretty normal, I would say. If that happens, definitely afterward, take care of yourself. Sometimes all I wanted to do is just crawl under my bed and sleep for the rest of the day. What really helped me was to get out and move around. I would get out and go walk. I would get out and exercise. It wasn't every single time that I would go out and exercise. Sometimes I would just crawl in my bed and just lay there. And toward the end of my therapy session, we would talk about what I could do to rewire my brain, to give myself a new narrative. This is where journaling is very important, to sit down and write down everything you're feeling and give yourself a new mantra. If you're telling yourself that you are responsible for everything that you went through as a child, you have to tell yourself the complete opposite. You really have to say, none of this was my fault. I was only a child and I did not have any control over what these adults were doing. It's very much a constant self-talk exercise that you have to do. I hope that helped. This is very short. It's part 1. I did not want it to be extensive. I do have a couple of things that I want to go ahead and just give you guys as a gift. I'll probably do every single time. I wish I could find a way to humor. When it comes to difficult topics like therapy, I don't know where the humor lies necessarily still, but maybe I'll find it one day. If you watched my prior video where I talk about being undocumented in DACA, I do have a book. I love this book. So it's The Undocumented Americans by Carla Cornejo. Here's the book. This is a short book. I believe it is about 200 pages. And she is a journalist. She's a genius, by the way. If you follow her on Instagram, she's hilarious. Carla, if you ever see this, you are a genius. You're hilarious. I love you. This book is really a book that if you know nothing about the undocumented life in the US, this is a great place to start. Get this book if you're like, you know what, I want to know more about how undocumented people live in America and carry this country on their backs. The other book is a book that I just received on my birthday from one of my closest friends. I love Brené Brown as well. My therapist actually referred me to Brené Brown when it came to the high level of shame and guilt that I was carrying as a result of my trauma. I knew nothing about guilt or shame in regard to how we carry it as a result of trauma. I obviously knew what guilt and shame was, but I didn't realize how deeply encrypted it is to us as people who go through traumatic experiences to take responsibility for our abuser or the people that traumatized us. So because of that, I started reading Brene Brown books as soon as I heard of who she was, just because she's really good at deciphering both shame and guilt, and not only those two difficult emotions, other emotions as well, like grief. If you are someone who is grieving, I would highly recommend that you look into her material and her books. She has really good TED Talks. Back to the book. This is by Brene Brown. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. It's called Atlas of the Heart. And the reason for why this will forever be one of my favorites is because it literally goes through every single emotion that we feel, especially when we are feeling envious or if we're feeling like we're lacking compassion. This is a really good place to just start and open up the book and read about what we're going through. So yes, I would recommend these two books. Actually, I have two more surprises for you guys. I will be adding a little bit of a playlist at the end of every video. And mostly it's because if you listen to this video and you find that there are certain aspects of it that are a little bit triggering, and if those triggers are difficult for you to process, definitely stick around for the playlist. I think that you'll feel a lot better listening to some music that will really help you uplift your mood again. Or if you would like to do an exercise that really helped me to really work through some of your difficult emotions toward your inner child, I am going to leave a link in the description box for an ASMR exercise. I do recommend that you toward the end of your day where you could sit down with yourself for about 30 minutes and really tap into who your inner child is and really heal with your inner child. It really helped me to get closer to my inner child and help my inner child feel safe and really just release a lot of responsibility that my inner child still has. On our next episode, we are going to talk about this space of denial that I was kept me safe during the time that I was processing a lot of my trauma. It was also extremely toxic and it jeopardized my relationship with my family. Now, we don't realize as human beings how through any unhealed trauma that you experience, there is a space of denial that as humans we tend to stay in, which is probably not the healthiest space to stay in. As a victim of denial, we lack a high level of accountability when we're in that space. I would say I was probably the most hurtful person when I stayed in that space of denial. I hope you enjoyed your time with me today. I really appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate you being here with me. This is very vulnerable, but I cannot believe I showed you my dirty closet. I'm okay with you judging me in my dirty closet. I just hope you're able to come back for part 2. Again, thank you for allowing me this time and space, and have a great week. Happy Monday. I'm sorry for not releasing anything last Monday. It wasn't that I didn't want to. Prior episode about DACA was very difficult. It drained me a little bit. It scared me a little bit too. I questioned whether I wanted to do this again, but it was important. It was important because I needed to speak up, not only for myself, but for all of my fellow DACA recipients. As stated in that video, DACA is being threatened. We understand that it is going through the judicial system again, and it may not be in our favor. So we need to keep raising our voice when it comes to DACA. Thank you again for being here. I really appreciate the time and space that we had, and have a great rest of your week. Bye.